Albert Walker stepped into the chamber, his boots echoing on the polished floor, each step deliberate. To the aliens gathered, he was a curiosity, an anomaly in this grand display of galactic unity. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some amused, others disdainful. The human diplomat stood out starkly among the gathered creatures, his tailored black suit and lean figure a stark contrast to the armored scales, fur, and bioorganic appendages surrounding him. Ralvern, the towering insectoid king of the Kantara swarm, sat atop a throne of shifting carapace at the far end of the chamber. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sound that resonated like grinding stone. To his left, a broad-shouldered reptilian growled a question in their native tongue, its forked tongue flicking in annoyance. Is this the best the humans could offer? Albert reached the center of the dais and stopped, his sharp, steel-gray eyes scanning the room. He was unmoved by the jeers or the undercurrent of hostility. His face bore a calm, almost detached expression, though his every movement exuded a quiet intensity. He had been sent as a symbol of humanity's willingness to negotiate, but his presence hinted at something far more potent. Ralvern rose, his segmented body unfurling to its full height. Towering over most delegates, he moved with a predatory elegance, his multifaceted eyes glinting. "So, this is humanity's emissary," he chittered, his voice echoing unnaturally through the chamber. "A mere diplomat, when we have crushed colonies and swatted fleets like flies. How fitting!" A ripple of cruel laughter filled the chamber. Albert remained still, his hands loosely clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was measured, each word carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Humanity doesn't negotiate out of weakness, King Ralvern. We negotiate because we prefer to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But make no mistake, when provoked, we are anything but weak." The laughter faltered, replaced by murmurs of surprise. Ralvern's mandibles flared in what might have been amusement or annoyance. "Provoked, you say? And what, little human, do you call your presence here? Your kind dared to claim territories beyond your station, squirming into the galaxy like pests. The swarm merely exterminates what does not belong." Albert tilted his head slightly, as though considering the words. His silence stretched uncomfortably long, drawing every gaze in the room. He was calculating, dissecting Ralvern's arrogance with cold precision. Finally he spoke. "We belong wherever we choose to stand. The galaxy has yet to understand what it means to provoke humanity, but you seem eager to find out." The tension in the room thickened, and some of the less confident delegates shifted uneasily. A diplomat from the Avarice Consortium, a species known for their telepathic capabilities, leaned toward a neighboring council member and whispered, "There is something off about him, something dangerous." The observation, though quiet, sent ripples through the assembly. Ralvern, however, was unmoved. He descended the steps of his throne, his sharp legs clicking against the obsidian. "Dangerous? You! Humanity hides behind technology and bravado, but your kind are little more than fleshy aberrations, ripe for consumption." The insectoid king loomed closer, his alien maw opening slightly in a grotesque mockery of a smile. "You think to intimidate the swarm? You lack the spine for war. All humans do." Albert, gaze never wavered, though something in his expression shifted, subtle, like the sharpening edge of a blade. He stepped forward, now standing mere feet from Ralvern. The two locked eyes, a predator meeting what it presumed to be prey. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the dais beneath them. "You're wrong," Albert said softly. His voice carried no anger, no bluster, only an icy certainty that cut deeper than any shout. "You think you know humans because you've seen our colonies burn and our ships break. But you've only met our desperation, not our resolve. You've seen us scattered, not unified. You think we fear war. You have no idea who we are when the gloves come off." Ralvern hissed, his mandibles clattering in frustration. "Enough of your words, human. You came here to grovel, not to threaten. Speak your terms of surrender or leave this chamber in disgrace." Albert smiled faintly, his lips barely moving. Surrender? No. I came here to deliver a message. Humanity has endured your kind's provocations long enough. You've mistaken patience for fear. That ends today. The room erupted in a cacophony of protests and gasps. Albert turned, taking slow steps toward the council floor, the sound of his boots resonating like a countdown. Ralvern's voice rose above the chaos, filled with rage. You dare threaten the swarm in our own council? You'll leave here in pieces, human. Albert stopped mid-step and glanced back over his shoulder. His eyes locked onto Ralvern's, and for the first time, the king hesitated. There was no humor, no uncertainty in the human's gaze. Only a darkness that suggested a history Ralvern could not fathom. Albert reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, silver device. A faint, collective gasp rippled through the chamber as the unmistakable shape of an antique earth pistol came into view. With a calm, almost lazy motion, he raised it, the barrel pointing directly at Ralvern's massive head. The silence was deafening. Ralvern's multifaceted eyes narrowed, his towering frame suddenly less certain. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. Albert smiled faintly, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "This," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "is a reminder, a symbol of what happens when you underestimate us. We may be few. We may not have your numbers or your ships, but we don't need them. What we have is far worse. For you." Ralvern froze, the weight of Albert, words cutting through his arrogance. The chamber, once alive with derision, was now suffocatingly still. Albert held the alien king's gaze for a long moment before lowering the pistol and stepping back. Without another word, he turned and strode toward the exit, his presence leaving an indelible mark on the assembly. Behind him, the whispers began anew, but they carried a different tone, one of uncertainty and perhaps fear. As the doors closed behind him, Albert allowed himself a faint smirk. The galaxy didn't realize it yet, but war had already begun. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension, the echoes of Albert Walker's departure still hanging in the air. Alien delegates shifted uneasily in their seats, murmurs filling the vast room as Ralvern remained rooted at the center, his hulking form a tableau of fury and disbelief. No one had ever dared to insult the swarm so brazenly, much less threaten its king. The faint glint of Albert, pistol lingered in Ralvern's mind, an artifact of human barbarity that he had underestimated. Ralvern's claws tapped against the dais, a rhythmic, unnerving sound. "The human oversteps," he hissed, his voice resonating with controlled malice. A pitiful insect buzzing about, thinking itself dangerous. Let them declare their war. They will know annihilation soon enough. Despite his words, Ralvern's inner council exchanged uncertain glances. His bravado could not mask the unsettling presence of the human diplomat. Delegates who had moments earlier joined in mocking humanity now spoke in hushed, wary tones. Some argued for preemptive strikes on Earth. Others questioned why the human had been allowed to leave alive. The Kantara swarm was a force of nature, consuming everything in its path. Yet, for the first time in living memory, unease crept through its ranks. Beyond the council chambers, Albert walked briskly through the polished corridors of the central council spire, flanked by two armed human marines. The air was thick with the metallic tang of sterilized oxygen, and the subtle hum of alien technology pulsed around them. His expression remained impassive, but the gears of his mind turned rapidly. "Sir," one of the Marines murmured, his voice low but steady, "we're getting reports. The swarm's fleets are already mobilizing near the outer colonies. Looks like they didn't take your warning too kindly." Albert nodded, barely breaking stride. "Good. Let them act first. That'll justify what's coming next." The Marine hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Permission to ask, sir, was it wise to provoke them like that? They outnumber us 1,000 to 1. Albert stopped abruptly, turning to face the Marine. His eyes, cold and calculating, bore into the soldiers. Wise? No. Necessary? Absolutely. They think they understand humanity, but they've only seen what we let them see. Tragedy, desperation, survival. They've never faced what we become when survival isn't enough anymore. He resumed walking, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Let them come. They've stirred the wrong hive this time. As they exited the council spire and boarded the human diplomatic shuttle, Albert felt the familiar tension settle over him. This wasn't the first time he had stood on the brink of war, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just a diplomat sent to placate aggressors. He was something far more dangerous, a fact that the galaxy was about to learn in brutal clarity. The shuttle's engines roared to life, propelling them away from the planet and into the void of space. Albert leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable as he stared out at the infinite darkness. It reminded him of his past, a life shrouded in shadow and secrecy. Before he was a diplomat, before he represented Earth's interests, he had been something else entirely. A ghost, a myth whispered in the darkest corners of human and alien societies alike. The code name still lingered, though it hadn't been spoken in years. Baba Yaga. The moniker wasn't born of folklore or fancy, but a reputation. Albert had earned it during humanity's desperate wars of survival, when conventional diplomacy failed, and other methods were required. Infiltration, assassination, psychological warfare. He had been the blade in the dark, the shadow that broke armies before they knew they were under attack. Humanity had long since buried that part of him, or so they thought. But the Kantara swarm's atrocities had resurrected it. As the shuttle approached the human fleet, a massive array of ships orbiting in tight formation, Albert rose from his seat. The Marines stood to attention, but he waved them off. Prepare the fleet for immediate action, he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. The Council thinks we're bluffing. Let's show them how wrong they are. Within hours, the fleet was mobilized. Sleek, angular warships bristling with weaponry began to move into position, their engines glowing like embers against the cold black backdrop of space. The command deck of the flagship buzzed with activity, officers coordinating logistics and monitoring enemy movements. Albert stood at the center of it all, his presence commanding and magnetic. His voice, calm yet unyielding, cut through the chaos like a blade. Send a message to all human colonies and allied outposts. The Kantara swarm has chosen war. We will meet them not with fear, but with fury. Let every ship, every soldier, and every civilian know this is not a fight for survival. This is vengeance. The officers nodded, their resolve hardening under his gaze. The room quieted briefly as they absorbed the weight of his words. Humanity had been underestimated for too long, treated as little more than a curiosity by the galaxy's dominant powers. But Albert had no intention of playing by their rules. The first signs of the swarm's fleets appeared on the holographic displays, a mass of shifting organic ships moving like a storm front across the stars. Their numbers were overwhelming, a tidal wave of destruction heading straight for the outer colonies. The room filled with grim anticipation, but Albert remained unfazed. Signal the fleet, he ordered, his tone calm but unrelenting. Target their advanced formation. No mercy. The officers relayed the command, and the human fleet surged forward. From the observation deck, Albert watched as the first volleys of fire erupted into the void. Beams of concentrated energy and kinetic projectiles tore through the swarm's organic vessels, shattering them into fragments. The Kantara ships retaliated, their bioorganic weapons spewing acid and plasma, but the humans were prepared. This wasn't just a battle. It was a statement. Albert mind raced as he analyzed the enemy's tactics. He could see the patterns forming, the gaps in their overwhelming force. They're arrogant, he muttered, almost to himself. They think sheer numbers will win this. They haven't adapted to fighting an enemy that can think 3 steps ahead. A junior officer nearby glanced at him nervously. Sir, our outer defenses won't hold if they push harder. Albert turned to the officer, his expression ice cold. They won't push harder. They'll panic. Watch. As if on cue, the swarm's advance faltered. The human fleet had struck with surgical precision, targeting critical ships and disrupting their formation. The tide of the battle shifted, and the swarm's confidence began to crack. Albert allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. This was the advantage humanity held. Not just ingenuity, but the will to fight beyond reason, to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. The swarm was learning the hard way what it meant to provoke a predator that had been cornered one too many times. As the battle raged on, Albert stepped away from the observation deck and into the command chamber, where he activated a secure communication link. The face of a high-ranking officer appeared on the screen, his expression grim but resolute. "Is it time?" the officer asked. Albert nodded. Time to remind the galaxy why the Baba Yaga was feared. Begin Phase 2. Let's make this personal. The screen went dark, and Albert turned back toward the battlefield. The Kantara swarm had underestimated humanity for the last time. The human fleet moved like a predator in the void, its sleek warships weaving between the Kantara swarm's chaotic formations. Explosions lit the darkness, debris scattering as the organic vessels of the aliens disintegrated under the precision of humanity's weapons. For every human ship lost, 3 of the swarms fell. But Albert Walker, standing at the heart of the flagship's command center, knew this was only the beginning. "Casualty report," he barked, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Minimal losses so far, sir," replied Commander Hargrove, his second-in-command. "Our fleet is holding the line, but the swarm's reinforcements are mobilizing near the Antares cluster. We estimate their full strength will converge within 12 hours. Albert nodded, his expression unreadable. His hands rested behind his back, his stance calm despite the storm unfolding around him. "Good. Let them gather. When they do, we'll show them why you don't corner a species with nothing left to lose." The room fell silent, save for the hum of holographic displays and the chatter of tactical officers coordinating strikes. Every pair of eyes turned toward the diplomat-turned-commander. They knew his reputation, whispered stories of the Baba Yaga that painted him as more legend than man. Yet seeing him now, with his unshakable resolve and icy precision, they realized the truth was far more unsettling. Albert leaned over the central console, the holographic map of the battlefield glowing blue against his weathered features. "Broadcast to all ships," he ordered. "This message isn't just for us. It's for every sentient being watching. I want the galaxy to understand what happens when you provoke humanity." Within moments, every human ship ceased fire, their weapons powering down as they drifted into formation. The swarm hesitated, their organic vessels shifting uncertainly in the face of the sudden pause. On every frequency, across every communication network, Albert Walker's voice rang out, carried by the ship's powerful transmitters. "To the Kantara swarm," he began, his tone cold and deliberate. "You sought to break us. You thought humanity was weak, divided, and afraid. But your arrogance blinded you to the truth. We are not afraid of war. We are war." His words echoed across the stars, carried to distant colonies, neutral worlds, and rival factions. Delegates from the Galactic Council, still reeling from his earlier confrontation, watched in stunned silence as his broadcast played in their chambers. "You attacked our colonies. You slaughtered our civilians. You sought to dominate us through terror and destruction. But in doing so, you have awakened something you cannot control, something you cannot stop." Albert, gaze shifted to the holographic display, where the swarm's reinforcements began to trickle in, vast waves of organic ships moving like a living tide. His voice grew harder, each word laced with unshakable conviction. "You wanted to see our breaking point. Instead, you've shown us yours. You may outnumber us, but we outthink you. You may overwhelm with brute force, but we endure. And now, you've given us the one thing we needed most, a reason to fight. With a nod to his communications officer, Albert signaled the fleet. The human ships, which had fallen silent moments before, erupted into coordinated action. Missile bays opened, energy cannons hummed to life, and squadrons of fighters surged forward with terrifying precision. The swarm barely had time to react before the first wave of destruction tore through their ranks. The battle resumed, but this time it was different. Humanity's tactics were surgical, relentless. Entire clusters of swarm vessels were annihilated in coordinated strikes, their organic weapons no match for the overwhelming technological and strategic superiority of the human fleet. On board the flagship, Albert turned to Hargrove. "Activate the hammer," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Hargrove hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, sir." Coordinates locked. At the far edge of the battlefield, a massive human warship moved into position. Its design was unlike anything the galaxy had seen, a prototype weapon of devastating power, built in secret and held in reserve for moments like this. The ship's hull glowed faintly as its systems powered up, drawing energy from its reactors. The Kantara swarm ships shifted uneasily, their organic forms rippling as though sensing the impending danger. Albert watched the holographic display, his expression grim. "Send them a warning shot. Make it clear what happens next is on their heads." The warship's main cannon fired, a single, concentrated beam of energy slicing through the void. It struck a cluster of swarm vessels, obliterating them in an instant. The remaining ships recoiled, their formation breaking as panic rippled through their ranks. Albert leaned closer to the console, his voice calm but unyielding. "To the Swarm King, Ralvern, this is your final chance. Surrender now, or face the full fury of humanity. There will be no negotiation, no mercy, only extinction." The swarm's response came swiftly. A massive holographic projection appeared on the flagship's bridge, displaying Ralvern's monstrous visage. His mandibles clicked angrily, his many eyes burning with fury. "Human," he snarled, his voice resonating with venom. "You speak as though you are my equal, but you are nothing. Your species is a fleeting anomaly, a brief spark in the vast darkness. We will consume you, as we have consumed countless others." Albert smiled faintly, his expression devoid of humor. "You had your chance, Ralvern. Now, you'll learn what it means to underestimate humanity." With a final nod, Albert gave the command. The prototype warship unleashed its full power, a blinding cascade of energy erupting from its cannon. The beam carved through the swarm's fleet, tearing apart ships with surgical precision. The battlefield was a maelstrom of fire and destruction, the once overwhelming tide of the swarm reduced to scattered remnants. The Galactic Council, watching the events unfold from their chambers, sat in stunned silence. Delegates who had mocked humanity only days before now stared in horror as the full might of Earth's forces decimated the swarm. Back on the flagship, Albert turned to Hargrove. "Prepare the next phase. This isn't over until Ralvern himself is finished." Hargrove saluted. "Yes, sir. All units are standing by." Albert allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The swarm had declared war, but they had no idea what they had truly unleashed. Humanity's rage was no longer contained. It was a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. As the flagship moved toward the heart of the battlefield, Albert's mind remained focused. This wasn't just about survival. This was about ensuring that no species would ever dare to threaten Earth again. The Baba Yaga was back, and the galaxy would never forget it. The human fleet pressed onward, the once strong Kantara swarm now little more than a broken, fleeing remnant. Albert Walker stood on the command deck of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. The enemy had been decimated, but the war was far from over. Every movement of the remaining swarm ships was a desperate scramble for survival, and Albert knew that the true test was about to begin. "Ralvern will not go quietly," he muttered to himself, the weight of the situation heavy on his mind. His crew sensed it. The way the atmosphere in the command room seemed to tighten with anticipation. Albert had only one goal now: to end this war on humanity's terms, once and for all. "Status report, Commander," Albert demanded, his voice carrying the edge of experience. Commander Hargrove, always calm under pressure, turned from his console, his eyes scanning the swirling chaos on the screen. "The Swarm's flagship is retreating, sir. It's heavily damaged, but it's making for the nearby asteroid field. Their fleet is scattering, though. There's little cohesion left." Albert's gaze never wavered. "That's not good enough. We need to finish this. No more running. Send a message. This ends now." "Understood, sir." Hargrove quickly relayed the order, and the fleet's remaining ships adjusted course, their trajectory locking onto the coordinates of the Swarm's flagship. The atmosphere aboard the flagship was a quiet storm, the hum of energy filling the air as every officer braced for the next phase of the battle. There was no cheering, no sign of triumph, only the focused intensity of soldiers in the midst of a mission they knew was crucial. Albert knew this final strike wasn't about victory. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. No one would ever challenge humanity again. Not after this. "I want all units prepared for deep space pursuit," Albert said. "We're not just stopping at the flagship. We're going to their homeworld next." The command center fell silent. Commander Hargrove met Albert, gaze with quiet understanding, his brows furrowing slightly. "Sir, you're planning to go that far? The Kthara homeworld is a heavily fortified system. We'll face their full force, and the galaxy may interpret it as an act of total war." Albert looked up, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Then let the galaxy see what happens when you push humanity too far. We've been tested. We've been pushed to the edge. And now, they'll see what happens when we decide to fight back." The crew moved with urgency, every member aware of the gravity of their orders. The human fleet advanced, not just as a collection of ships, but as an unstoppable force, a manifestation of humanity's collective fury. Albert could feel it in the air, a shared resolve that turned each of them into an instrument of vengeance. The Kantara had made a grave mistake by underestimating them, and now they would learn just how deeply that error would cost them. As the fleet closed in on the Swarm's flagship, Albert allowed himself a moment to reflect. It was strange, he thought, how far humanity had come. From a single blue planet, vulnerable and isolated in the vastness of space, to this, a species capable of annihilating entire civilizations. The face of war had changed and humanity had adapted, evolved into something no one could ignore. But he would not let that power be squandered. It would be used to secure Earth's future, to ensure that no other species would ever again think to threaten their home. The Swarm flagship, once a symbol of the Kantara's might, now drifted like a dying thing. The once proud alien vessel, its sleek, organic hull scarred and cracking from the previous barrage, limped toward the asteroid field, seeking refuge among the rocky masses. But there would be no refuge for them. Not anymore. "Close the gap," Albert commanded. His hand gripped the railing in front of him as the distance between the two fleets dwindled rapidly. His mind was clear and his body was calm. He was prepared for whatever was to come. The soldiers on board the flagship were prepared too. Humanity wasn't fighting just to survive anymore. They were fighting to obliterate the threat to their existence. "Prepare to launch the assault pods," Albert said. "Once we breach their hull, we're going in." The order was met with a unified response, officers nodding, their eyes steady with resolve. The assault pods were humanity's secret weapon, specialized, highly mobile craft capable of slipping past enemy defenses to deliver deadly force directly to a target. But more than that, they were a statement that humanity would not back down, not even in the face of overwhelming odds. Moments later, the fleet's assault pod shot forward, hurtling toward the Kantara flagship with terrifying precision. The alien ship was now surrounded, no place to run, no place to hide. The humans would come for them, every last one of them. Inside the Kantara flagship, Ralvern, the alien commander, seethed with rage. His command ship had been crippled, its systems failing one by one. He had never anticipated this, had never imagined that humanity could rise so quickly from their position of weakness. He had assumed that his swarm's sheer numbers, their relentless nature, would crush Earth underfoot. But he had not counted on the one thing that made humanity unique, their unbreakable will. He watched helplessly as the first pods impacted his ship's hull, ripping through it with ease. His ships, once so proud, were now little more than carcasses awaiting the final blow. And from the debris came the humans, their warriors, relentless and unstoppable. "Rally the troops! Hold them off!" Ralvern screamed, but it was too late. The humans were already inside. In the narrow corridors of the Kantara flagship, Albert Walker led his team through the wreckage. They moved swiftly, a unit of hardened soldiers cutting down anything in their path. There were no words, no grand speeches, only the sound of gunfire and the crackle of alien armor as humanity's fury washed over their enemies. Ralvern, cornered in his command chamber, snarled at the approaching humans. The Baba Yaga, the very thing he had dismissed as a myth, had come for him. Albert Walker, the diplomat turned warrior, stood at the threshold, his weapon aimed directly at the alien king's head. "This ends here," Albert said, his voice carrying the weight of a war long fought and finally won. Ralvern, his defiance fading with every passing second, only managed a growl. "You may kill me, but you'll never kill the swarm." Albert stepped closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We'll make sure of that." With a single shot, the Kantara swarm's reign of terror came to an end. The flagship, now in the hands of its conquerors, was nothing more than a symbol of humanity's vengeance. And as the human forces set their sights on the swarm's homeworld, Albert knew that this was not just a victory. It was a message. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity unleashed its fury, and the galaxy would never again dare to cross them.